I would like to mention that this is the last session of a series of 5. We started this Monday with a session on the current approaches to STI policy making in the context of the SDGs. This one was followed by a session on Tuesday entirely dedicated to the design of policy instruments, STI policy instruments for the SDGs. Then there was another session on innovation and entrepreneurship, mainly dedicated to instruments that can favor the linkages between innovation and entrepreneurship. And yesterday, there was a session on the implementation of STI policies and policy instruments. Today, we are moving to another topic that is very relevant to STI policy practitioners. And I'm referring to monitoring and evaluation of STI policies for the SDGs. Today's structure of the session is the following. So we already covered the overview of the other sessions. We will have an introduction to monitoring and evaluation of STI policies for the SDGs, which will be followed by an open discussion where you will have the possibility to comment and ask questions to the presenter. This one will be followed by country examples and experiences in STI policy for SDGs. And in this case, we are going to use a tool to do an exercise and provide examples of monitoring and evaluation in your country. Following this, we are moving to the last presentation. And it will be an intervention on STI policy assessments, challenges, and lessons learned. Finally, we will have a little bit more time for another session of open discussion, and we will move towards the conclusions and the key messages. Again, today we have a great lineup of speakers. We have from UNESCO, Cornelia Zinova. Cornelia is a program specialist in science policy and capacity building at UNESCO in Paris, where she manages STI policy projects at national and regional levels. She's also coordinator together with Dimo Chalowski of the UN-IATT on capacity building. Today, we also have Pierre Boulois. He's the head of the Global Environment Outlook Program at the UNEP, at the UN Environment Program. In this role, he has led his team to complete the 6th Global Environment Outlook, which was published in March 2019, and also other regional environmental assessments. We also have Dimo Chalowski with us. He's an economist at UNCTAD. Dimo manages and drafts UNCTAD STI policy reviews and conducts capacity building for STI policy review countries and other UN member states. Dimo also worked on e-commerce and digital economy and development issues, and was a contributing author to UNCTAD Information Economy Report. He is, together with Cornelia, as I mentioned, the coordinator of this work stream on capacity building. Today, we also have other 3 colleagues that will help us, especially in more logistics part, specifically the use of tools such as Mural and Multimeter. We have with us Zhengmei Wang and Despina Susoni from UNESCO. They will help us with the Multimeter sessions and also to moderate the chat. We also have Sharif Shauki from UNEP. He will help us with the Mural tool. And I would also like to mention the support we received from colleagues in UNESCO Regional Office, and also the great work of the interpreters for French and Portuguese. And just a few more information, details on the use of Zoom, please keep your microphone and camera off when you're not speaking. Take the floor using the reaction button and then the raise the hand button. Unmute yourself when the floor is given to you. Feel free to use the chat box to ask your questions or just to comment on the presentation during the presentations as well. You can use the language that you prefer because we also have interpretation in French and Portuguese. You may want to select now the language that you prefer. You also have the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. Finally, just a few guidelines for Mentimeter. I see my colleague Despina already put in the chat the first question, so we can practice a little bit the use of this tool. It's just to break the ice, and probably some of you already used this tool before, or at least in these sessions, in this training. I will now stop sharing my screen, and May can already share the answer. So the first question, just to break the ice, is to specify your country where your institution is located. It's really just to get familiar with the tool and to also give us an idea of your country of origin. I see Botswana, Senegal, Austria, Colombia, DR Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, Zambia. Okay, that's quite diverse. I see a few more questions coming in, probably. A few more replied. Probably we can move to the next question. I see one more. Botswana has a great representation, probably. Lesotho. Tanzania. Okay, thank you very much. We can move to the second Mentimeter question. Thank you, Despina. So the second question, you find it in the chat box. If you click on it, you can already provide your answer. And the question is, have you participated in monitoring and evaluation of STI policy exercises? You also have a few options, never, and I'm not familiar with the topic. No, but I'm familiar with monitoring and evaluation processes. I've been directly involved in monitoring and evaluation processes. Or the last option is I'm an expert in monitoring and evaluation processes. You find the link to answer this question in the chat box. No answers yet.
Hi, Angela.
Yes.
Hi, it's Annalene. Yeah, hi, it's Annalene. I think there's something wrong with the link.
Okay, I see.
We're submitting, but it seems the link is not updating. I think there's something wrong with the link.
Okay, now it is.
Oh, there it comes. Yeah.
Now they're coming. We already have 15 answers. So I see that it seems that most of the participants are not familiar with this topic. Indeed, it was one of the topics that in the past were requested in previous training that we delivered. So it's in a way it's good for us to hear that this will be helpful to the majority of the participants today. But also we have a few that are a bit familiar or have been directly involved in monitoring and evaluation processes. That's also a good news for us. Okay, so thank you very much, May. It's very helpful, this first question. I would now move to our first presenter, Cornelia Zinova. She will give us an introduction to monitoring and evaluation of STI policies for the SDGs.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Angela, and good afternoon to all. Bonjour à tous. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today for this last session of our training on monitoring and evaluation. I will just start sharing my screen with the presentation for this. Angela, if you can just confirm that you see it in a diaporama mode.
Yes, not full screen though.
It's coming. I put it in full screen.
Now it's good. Now it's good.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will start this presentation on some key issues, key concepts on monitoring and evaluation of STI policies in the context of the SDGs. And I would like to start my presentation with just some questions for thoughts, questions that maybe we could further interact during the open discussion. These are just some things that I wanted to maybe raise your interest on and for the discussion throughout the session. First of all, on the quantitative indicators, why these indicators alone are not enough for evidence-based policies, and are they enough also for monitoring and evaluation purposes? How contextual factors, governance, and implicit policies influence STI systems, and how the monitoring and evaluation should also tackle these various aspects. Why policies and resources are not all we need. And this is really key as part of the monitoring and evaluation. And also how monitoring and evaluation would help us to provide some key answers for better moving forward in building inclusive science, technology, and innovation systems. I wanted to share also with you just a few quotes that I found interesting on the subject of measurements of monitoring and evaluation. And notably, the measure of success is not whether you have a tough problem to deal with, but whether it is the same problem you had last year. So this is just to start our discussion. And I wanted also to put your attention on the need of data, and I included this slide because it was also something that has been raised in the previous sessions on the need to measure, on the need to have quantitative data. This is a slide for measuring actually the progress and the targets on the R&D intensity in the European Union countries. I put this slide not to comment on the figures. This is not what I wanted to share with you, but most importantly to show that different countries are setting their targets in very different manners. Some are very ambitious, others are more realistic in achieving the targets. But also more importantly, what I wanted to show and illustrate with this table is that it is important to have targets to reach and to look in time how progress has been made in achieving these targets. So now key issues on monitoring and evaluation of STI policies and why we need to monitor and evaluate, why it is important. First, the issue of evidence-based policy making. Also policy making as a learning process, learning by experience. It was also mentioned in throughout the different sessions that policy making throughout the different policy cycle stages is really a learning process, and this is particularly true in the stage of monitoring and evaluation, where we use the results of the monitoring and evaluation to make some improvements, to learn how to do things differently and better. The issue of the practices of monitoring and evaluation, these are two separate processes, but at the same time very complementary. And I think here it is really important to mention that monitoring information can raise interesting questions that further evaluation can then attempt to answer. And also monitoring can uncover some new areas for which monitoring can be carried out. So these two processes in a way work in tandem, and this is also what I will be showing further in the presentation. The issue also of the subject for monitoring and evaluation. Our discussion today is about monitoring and evaluation of STI policies, but of course there are monitoring and evaluation which may be on programs, on specific policy instruments and tools, on projects, of course, on organizational units, also on individuals. So it's important to make these clear distinctions about the subjects. Oops. But back to the need for evidence-based policy, because this is something key and on why we actually proceed with monitoring and evaluation. So just to step back and see what is an evidence-based policy. First, it is to inform policymakers about what works and thereby produce better policy outcomes. And this is exactly also the objective of monitoring and evaluation. It tests theory and why will the policy be effective and likely impacts if successful. It takes into account the influences outside of the policy that may affect the outcome. And it examines both direct and indirect effects that occur because of the policy. This is a very important point to consider also in the monitoring and evaluation, to examine, to have a broader spectrum, and to really include and have a closer look at the indirect effects, which in some cases could even be more important than the direct effects that the policy could occur. Let's now have a bit of look at different practices for monitoring and evaluation. First, on the monitoring, and just to have a quick kind of definition of the monitoring practice. Monitoring provides information on where a policy, program, or a project is at any given time compared to some baseline or objective. And the monitoring is largely descriptive. Here, the notion of baseline, I think, is very important and induces the idea that monitoring is and should be a systemic and regular exercise. It's important to compare to some the baseline that we have previously established. And for that, of course, we need information. We need, on one side, quantitative data, but we also need qualitative data. On the quantitative data, what do we mean by this? For that, we would need measurement approaches and to collect the necessary data. so that we produce the necessary indicators to have a better understanding of the situation. Here we traditionally use the input and output indicators, the input STI indicators. By that we mean what has been actually invested in terms of labor force, in terms of funding, in terms of infrastructure, the foreign direct investment. So we measure all the investments in this aspect to produce the input indicators. We have also the output indicators, which we expect to be the results from what we have inputted in the system, what we have invested in the system, and these are the output indicators, which are measured in terms of patents, in terms of scientific publications, in terms of innovations, number of high-tech enterprises. This compilation of input and output indicators form our quantitative, let's say, information. Unfortunately, it's not enough. It's not. It cannot provide a comprehensive understanding of the situation, and notably of the performance of the science, technology, and innovation system, which we often see as a black box. It's not because we have invested that necessarily the good results will come out of it. We need to open this black box and understand what would be conducing towards good results and expected results and reaching the targets. And this is where we need qualitative information to understand what is happening, and collecting this information is equally important than measuring and collecting the quantitative data. This information actually relates to the policy mixes, to the various interactions, to the governance, to the contextual factors, the legal frameworks, all the coordination mechanisms and interaction in the system, in order to have a full picture of the situation. So this is with regard to monitoring, and now I would like to move to the evaluation practices and try to answer to the question why also it's important to proceed with evaluation. Evaluation in itself gives evidence of why the outcomes are or not being achieved. The evaluation, of course, also will tend to provide some answers and adjustments, suggestions and recommendations to provide a certain causal account. On the left, you can see some of the rationale and the needs for evaluation that have been listed. Of course, there are many other motivations for evaluation, but among the most important and obvious ones are the accountability, whether we are evaluating to understand whether we are delivering on political promises. Also, for advocacy purposes, the evaluation results might help us convincing on the results and the way forward. For learning purposes, and this is very important, the report findings could help us to have some organizational learning, also individual learning, and to proceed with the necessary improvements. Also for analysis and identifying the gaps, this is a very direct need for the evaluation to see what works, what does not, and why they are failures or successful achievements. For building institutional memory, and also for surveying also the evolution in time. This is also very important, and again, it is again very important to have the evaluation practice introduced as a very systemic and regular exercise. For multi-stakeholders engagement, this is another rationale for conducting evaluation. And as for the different policy cycle stages, for the monitoring and evaluation stage, the participatory approach is also very important. It allows mobilizing the different stakeholders and thus gaining their support, gaining their better understanding of the different projects, programs, policies. So all this will lead to some improvements in the future. About the methods, evaluation methods, and here again there are some quantitative information that we are using, and also methods used as case studies, user surveys, interviews, peer reviews, focus groups, etc. Oops, I'm just and now I would like just to talk a little bit about the different paradigms, the different STI policy settings and their implication for monitoring evaluation. On one side, we have the policy mix, and this was discussed especially yesterday, which is very complex, and the interactions, the different dimensions are very important. There is a mix of rationals, a mix of domains, a mix of instruments that also have to fit with the different levels at national level or regional level or local level. So there is a kind of complex paradigm around the policy mix. Also the paradigm of the SDGs, which especially in session 1, we have discussed the interrelation and also interactions between the different SDGs and their targets. So this is also a very kind of complex paradigm in terms of how we approach the monitoring and evaluation when we are in front of such complex situations. But the monitoring and evaluation practices themselves have remained very predominantly linear, and have not really evolved as have evolved the innovation theories. So there is a certain lag behind in terms of monitoring and evaluation practices, which follow still some linear models. So this is something interesting, and it will be interesting to discuss on this. Few challenges also that we can observe in the process of monitoring and evaluation of the STI policies. For instance, the STI policies are more and more complex with a lot of multiple goals, variety of agents, interactions, in many cases unclear assumptions about the models or complex cause-effect relationship. And therefore, monitoring and evaluation, it's difficult to deliver just on simple cost-benefit ratio of individual measures. This is something that monitoring and evaluation practices should consider. That more instruments should be assessed, and also many stakeholders need to be informed and engaged. And therefore, there is a real risk of under-evaluation if those have not been concerned. Also, tension in terms of complexity of the system versus kind of simple accountability result of the exercise. Problems also of setting the key performance indicators. This is very crucial in the initial stage of the monitoring and evaluation, and for that, of course, it is important to have embedded in the STI policies also a well-developed monitoring and evaluation framework and clear institutional settings for those institutions that are in charge of conducting monitoring and evaluation. Before concluding my presentations, I just wanted to highlight some of the key messages from this presentation. First, monitoring and evaluation, of course, it's important. It's really an integral part of the policy cycle. It shouldn't be neglected. And it's a learning process, both at the individual and institutional level. As mentioned, the monitoring and evaluation are two separate processes, but however, they really work in tandem. And on one side, the monitoring provides the information on where we are, but the evaluation can then go a step beyond and provide some clear answers maybe and recommendations on how we can do better in the future. So with this, monitoring and evaluation has the power to kind of create virtuous policy cycles. For that, some clear monitoring and evaluation framework need to be developed as part of the STI policies. And also that monitoring and evaluation should consider that policy making is not a linear process. With this, I will stop my presentation, and I will be very happy to further discuss with you and interact on these important topics. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Nelly, for this great introduction to the topic. I would like to remind to the participants that you can post your questions and comments in the chat box, or you can just raise your hand and speak, open your microphone and speak during the session. I got a question, my colleague Despina got a question directly, so which is very specific from DRC. Kindly advise on how to monitor and evaluate the impact of policies. It's from Philippe in DR Congo. Would you like to add something more, Philippe? We will go more in a bit more in detail of the topic, but please feel free to add more, or maybe Cornelia, if you'd like to briefly provide a couple of points.
Yes, thank you, Angela, and thank you to our colleague from DRC for this interesting question. And actually, this is really the key aspect of how really to monitor and evaluate. And here, I think there, as mentioned, the various processes. It's a kind of combination of various processes. But first, the science, technology, and innovation policy itself should have a clear framework, and if there is not, it's good to focus on developing a monitoring and evaluation framework with clear performance indicators that are well thought, and also the baseline is very important. For that, of course, we would need to have a kind of good understanding of the current situation and where the country stands in terms of previous implementation, so that we can see the progress. And of course, the targets. The targets should be clearly and explicitly defined in the policy, and also the objectives and the goals, therefore, so that we can monitor and further evaluate the impact. But I think, as mentioned in the presentation, there are of course a number of collection of information. The information part is really important to have the tools, the information that is needed to proceed with the monitoring and evaluation, to have engagement by the different stakeholders that could really have some feedback, or really could testify of having some results and implementation. I think it's also in the case study that we will be following. I think we will have a more practical example of how monitoring and evaluation is actually proceeded. Thank you, Angela. I hope
Absolutely.
I have.
Thanks. Absolutely.
Right.
Thanks a lot. I see there is already a discussion going on in the chat. Anne Kingiri is asking, I think is commenting rather, I think capabilities for monitoring and evaluation are lacking in Africa, and suppose this is a major challenge that overrides all the others. Any comment? I see Pierre Boileau, who is our next presenter, already commented. This is not only true for Africa. The assessment that we did in the GEO6 shows this is true in many world regions. Pierre, feel free to take the floor, as well as Anna, if you'd like to add something else, please open your microphone.
Thank you, Angela. I just wanted to say, I'll speak about this in the next presentation, but in the report that we did in 2019 for environmental policy, and this is, I mean, a general feeling across many policy areas, there is very rarely a baseline set for some of these policies. It's difficult to sometimes define the targets of the policy, and the actual monitoring towards those targets is actually lacking in a lot of cases. Now, in our report, we were able to at least identify 25 cases in different parts of the world where there was literature and there was evaluation, monitoring and evaluation going on, but that was about as deep as we could go. And we had quite a hard time finding cases where we could evaluate the effectiveness of those policies with the information that was provided. Now, it's possible within governments that evaluation happens and it's not made public, but my suspicion is that that those policies that we did find where we had publicly available information are probably the best monitored policies. And that policy evaluation is not done as rigorously as it should be in many parts of the world.
Thanks a lot, Pierre. Before moving to your presentation, I would do another round of Mentimeter questions. If kindly Despina and Zamay can support on this. The following question is, has the STI policy in your country been monitored and evaluated? Please use the link that Despina posted in the chat to answer this question.
Thank you for this question, Angela. I just wanted to say that this is really to have a bit of
feeling
of the participants and the situation in the country that they represent. And we see already some of the results coming. It's for now equally yes, no, partly, mainly partly. Yes, thank you very much for these answers. It's here we really wanted to also emphasize and raise awareness of the need to include this as an integral part of the policy cycle, that STI policies alone, without having this regular and systematic exercise of monitoring and evaluating them, are unfortunately could really miss the one of their greatest potential.
Yes, absolutely. It's important to stress that this is not a separate part, but should be planned from the beginning when designing the STI policy. So I see the majority of the answers goes to partially monitored and evaluated. This is very interesting to hear. I see two participants raise their hand. Fernando and Ludovico, would you like to? Fernando first, probably.
Yes, thank you, Angela. Just a quick comment, and I think something that people have commented in the previous sessions, the lack of human resources. For many of us, the way we started doing this kind of work was through an evaluation. I think there is also opportunities for creating jobs, specialized jobs, and creating dynamics around the system, not just the government, but also creating opportunities for people who are interested in the policies. There is not always jobs in the government, but this is an option. And as you can see, and Angela, you see that maybe in the European Commission, right? That the amount of contracts that are granted to private service providers. My experience in living in Canada, there's a whole market service in this. So it's really a dynamic market that could also be an opportunity for the development of the systems, right? This thinking is also important around completing some of the human resources that are missing also in the country. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Fernando. And this goes hand in hand with what we mentioned in previous sessions about the strengthening of capacities, and in this case specifically on monitoring and evaluation, analytics, etc. Ludo, would you like to comment?
Sure. Yeah, I'm trying to send my video, which doesn't.
We see it black.
Yes, it doesn't start. For some reason, it doesn't start. Anyway, if you can hear me, I can.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, then let's just speak. Okay,
now I can see you.
Okay, perfect. When we talk about monitoring and evaluation, I think it is incomplete. I think when you talk of monitoring, evaluation, and learning, although it was referred before as learn, that it's a learning process, but I think the learning aspect of it is what is most forgotten. Evaluation normally takes in evaluation departments, in evaluation teams, evaluation groups, which do their reports, okay? They present them in public, they discuss them, and that's when it ends. The learning part of it, going back and feeding back into the system, getting everybody to interiorize, to adopt recommendations, or discuss them, or say why they're not. That's the part where I think it's more work needs to be done. And so just to wind up this point, I think we should think not solely in terms of monitoring and evaluation, but we should actually title it monitoring, evaluation, and learning to emphasize.
I would add.
Yeah. And in order to emphasize the point that it is not about the monitoring and evaluation, but about the learning, which is the hardest part to do.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Ludo, for this comment. I would quickly go to the second Mentimeter question for this session on policy evaluation. Which institutions are in charge of STI policy evaluation? I am not sure the question is already in the chat. Yes, the spin already shared it in the chat box. You have here for this question different options: Ministry of STI, other science-based ministries, Ministry of Planning, Science and Innovation agencies, funding agencies, Parliament, international partners, independent bodies. Answers are coming in. Nelly, would you like to comment?
Yes, I can see that, and this is really the most common, that the Ministry of STI, that is often the body that also design and in many cases implement and also evaluate. So this is something also to be given a special attention, because there might be some maybe potential areas for conflict of interest, if I could say. But there are very few countries in the world that have specific independent agencies that are in charge of the evaluation. So the most common ones are indeed the Ministry of STI, that also proceed with the monitoring and the evaluation. So thank you for these answers.
Yes, thanks again for the answers. It's interesting. It's a learning process also for us to see what you share with us. Thanks, May. I think we can now move to the next presentation. So the next presentation will be on, will provide us some country examples and experiences in STI policies for SDGs. Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Angela. I'm just going to try and share my screen here. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, good. My goal here is really to speak mostly about assessing policy effectiveness. We've spoken about monitoring and evaluation, and we've had some questions about this. Our role within the UN Environment Program is conducting assessments. So we use the word assessment, but it really is sort of the same thing as monitoring and evaluation. We consider evaluation a more independent process. So when we do assessments, we bring in some outside expertise and we conduct the assessment to be able to provide some information to decision makers on the environment. So again, providing evidence-based decision-making or supporting evidence-based decision-making. Here I'm going to go through a case study for environmental policy. And this, I think, generally applies to all areas of policy. It's really about trying to make sure that the policies are evaluated or assessed or monitored correctly so that learnings can happen, as Ludo mentioned it. Just a bit of background on the report that we published in 2019. This is the 6th edition of the flagship environmental assessment that's conducted every 4 to 5 years by UNEP. It's evolved over time to, at the request of member states, to look more closely at environmental policies and what might be working well and what might not be working. And in the GO6, we actually did 10 of the 25 chapters. We're looking at the effectiveness of policies in 5 different environmental areas: air policy, biodiversity policy, oceans, land, and freshwater. And we were able to conduct or to look at 5 case studies and how effective those policies were. The goal of the analysis was just to draw some broad lessons about which types of policies are most effective for achieving environmental goals and environmental change. We tried to look at a very long time period, over a 30-year time period, to do this. First of all, we had to look at the basic goals of assessing policy effectiveness. And to do this, we did a bit of an academic exercise to look at the policy and theory, policy theory and practice. Basically in the environmental sphere, we've had what we call goals-based diplomacy, where countries at the international level establish environmental goals, and they try and develop their national policies to meet those environmental goals. So we can think about the Paris Agreement of trying to reach a 1.5 degree world or a 2 degree world, the IATT targets, which are biodiversity targets that were set to be achieved by 2020. And really the struggle, I think, is for countries then to translate those environmental goals into national policies. And then the effectiveness is determined by a number of factors in those national policies: the overall cost of the policy, the benefits, either direct benefits or co-benefits, competitiveness impacts, unintended consequences, and also, of course, the environmental outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And the conclusions really of this section of the report are that good upfront policy design often determines the eventual effectiveness of policies. It's really the thinking upfront that makes the policy more effective over time. But to do the upfront design, you really have to design in the monitoring and evaluation of the policy as you move along. Again, a little bit more theory on how a typical policy is developed. I'm sure many of you know this, but basically it's very important for you to clearly identify the issue that you're trying to affect with your policy and clearly frame the complexity of that issue and what are the important impacts that you are trying to influence through the policy. Then, of course, you have to choose the most effective policy instrument, and I'll go through a few of them a little bit later on. Are you trying to influence the behavior by pricing, by regulation, or by persuasion? And that is really key to achieving an effective policy outcome. For monitoring and evaluation, really, you need to have, as Nelly said, some very good performance indicators. How should you track the policy? And there are many areas that you can track the effectiveness of a policy. We'll look at those in a little bit more detail later. And then you have your effectiveness assessment. After some time, have you been able to achieve what you intended with the policy? And if you haven't achieved it, why haven't you achieved those? And then finally, there's an adaptive management part of this cycle, which basically, if you're not achieving the outcomes, can you change or redirect the policy to actually achieve the outcomes that you're hoping for? We've also looked a little bit at the policy typology, the different types of policies that can be brought into play. Of course, there are 5 broad categories of policies. You can use command and control policies that bring in regulation or speak to or develop standards in particular areas. You can promote innovation by supporting research and development or supporting commercialization of different new technologies or new ways of doing things. You can provide market-based incentives such as carbon prices or subsidies to try and change behavior or practices. Of course, you can provide also some education, knowledge awareness raising, and advocacy to change either the supply or the demand side of your policy goal. And you can provide supportive investments, either providing some type of infrastructure or some type of market access to be able to try and achieve a particular policy outcome. Then we, within our report, tried to develop a method for assessing policy effectiveness for those 25 case studies. As I'm going to speak about in a little while, it is very difficult to pick one particular way of measuring policy effectiveness. There are, as our authors and our experts suggested, there are hundreds of ways that you can assess policy effectiveness. We eventually had to choose a qualitative method that basically looked at the literature around a particular case study and evaluated it against 12 criteria. First of all, has a baseline been established before the policy was put in place? Do we know what was happening before the policy was in place? Have we looked at coherence, convergence, and synergy with other policies? Are there co-benefits from the policy? Are there equity winners and losers? Are there enabling or constraining factors? What is the cost effectiveness or the anticipated cost effectiveness of the policy? Over what time frame are you going to measure the effectiveness? Is the policy feasible? Is it implementable within the context of what you're trying to do? Is it politically acceptable? Is it acceptable to stakeholders? Have you involved stakeholders in the development of the policy? Are there unintended impacts or effects from the policy? And what is your overall assessment of the effectiveness? Did you achieve the goals of the policy that you were trying to put in place? And of course, to do all of these things, we had to look at whether the policies had some effect on the environment. So in the chapters that we did, we not only looked at these 12 criteria, but we looked at outcomes indicators, high-level indicators on the environmental issues of biodiversity, climate change, and others, to see if there were some overall environmental results that we could actually see in the data. So let's shift from the broader theoretical part of this to a more practical application. We, in the 25 case studies, looked specifically at South Africa's free basic water policy, which was brought into existence in 2001. And it actually is a policy to provide 6,000 liters per household per month of water to all South Africans. And the idea is that you wanted to try and achieve this as a basic right. This is consistent with a number of UN resolutions, the basic right to clean water and sanitation services, but in this case, mostly water. And so the Department of Water in South Africa did an evaluation in 2007 to find out, after bringing in place this policy, was it effective? And they reported that 75% of the population now had access to free basic water, which is a pretty good outcome, given the challenges of providing water access to a very large population. The other fact was that 69% of that 75% were poorer communities who had been provided free basic water access. So I think that as an outcome, 6 years after the implementation of the policy is actually quite good. They did, to be able to determine this 75% figure, they actually established a policy at the beginning, a baseline at the beginning of the policy, where out of 44.8 million people in the country, 5 million, 11%, had no access to safe water supply, and a further 6.5 million, which is 15%, did not have a defined basic service level for water. So they might have access to water, but they weren't able to predict how much water they would have each month. Now, of course, the policy enacts Section 27 of South Africa's Constitution, which states the right to basic right to water, and is governed by a number of regulations, the Water Services Act and the National Water Act. So again, we're actually creating some institutional services to be able to create this basic water right. Now, of course, their cost effectiveness assessment in 2007 showed that the cost of providing water is actually quite high. In urban areas, it's about $385 per person. In rural areas, $278 per person. So that cost actually had to be incorporated into the national budget. And it became a strain on resources that could have been allocated to other areas, but because this was a basic water right, it was important to implement it. And there were co-benefits, obviously, with regard to public health, general well-being and welfare, and gender equity. But the ability to measure those co-benefits was actually quite difficult, given the context that this policy was being implemented in. Now, in the national context, there are a number of other considerations that you have to have. What is your institutional or what is your initial situation? Because if it's desperate, if you don't have access to any water or regular access to water, then any improvement can be viewed as being effective. There are high costs of some of these policies, which take resources away from other areas. Pardon me. Is the policy mainly benefiting wealthy individuals, or what we call free riders in policies, at the expense of poorer communities? How easy is it to adapt the policy once it's in place? Can you change it? Can you make it more effective over time? Are there transboundary issues? Are there other communities or countries that might be affected by this policy? For example, if you're extracting too much water, are you actually affecting the ability of other countries to access water? Can the policy be considered more effective if you actually are able to measure the co-benefits and carefully track those? And in your assessment process, are you avoiding bias? Are you actually producing results that can be relied upon? Now I'm going to ask you to participate in a virtual exercise using a website called Mural. This is a whiteboard exercise. So we're going to ask you to put small sticky notes onto this electronic whiteboard. There are 5 main questions that we want you to try and answer through this exercise. We want you to identify a policy that has been evaluated or that you would like to evaluate the effectiveness of. So that's in the first quadrant of the exercise. We want you to identify if the policy had a baseline before it was implemented. Have you assessed the cost of effectiveness of the policy? Have you assessed any co-benefits with the policy? And overall, how effective was the policy? So I'm going to turn to my colleague. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. I'm going to turn to my colleague Sharif Shaki, who has basically prepared the exercise for you. And hopefully over the next 10 or 15 minutes, we can get some good input and some good ideas related to the exercise. So Sharif, please go ahead and give us a sense. I think some people have already logged in, so I think this is great.
Yeah, thank you, Pierre. So hello, everyone. I'm Sharif Shaki. I've been working with the Geosix assessment with Pierre Boileau for the last 3 or 4 years now. So I'm going to guide you through this exercise today. So I would like your undivided attention before you go ahead and move things around too much. So this is meant to be like a fun and interactive exercise for us to work on to understand your policy and a policy evaluation of that. So what you're going to first do when you first arrive here is you'll be prompted with to say if you need to join, if you want to put your name, it's okay. You can go ahead and say you're an anonymous shrimp, whatever you would like. That's completely fine. And then you will go to the left-hand side to start adding your sticky notes. So if you see here, there's something called a little text thing on the right, on the left here, and you'll be able to pick a color of a sticky note. It'd be better if we could diversify the colors throughout so we can identify each different person. But what you're going to do is drag one across here, enlarge it a bit so you can understand your own text, and then put your initials. It's very important you put your initials for each of the different policies. So for this first one, this will be the proposals of your policy. So for example, I would put Sharif Shaki, SS, and free basic water policy in South Africa. And this would go throughout the entire thing, and you would fill out throughout the different 4 categories. If you're having troubles zooming, you can use the mouse wheel, or you can also hold Z and click, or Alt Z to zoom out. So feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and I'm happy to help you along the way. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sharif and Pierre. So please, if you have doubts or you need assistance, let us know in the chat or raise your hand.
So we've seen our visiting rabbit has already started to put some notes up. We would appreciate it if you could put your initials on it so that as you put your policy in there and establish whether it had a baseline cost, if it had cost benefit analysis or co-benefits, that we can come back and sort of review what you put in there, maybe ask you to provide a few more details because you can't put a lot of details on these sticky notes. But it's greatly appreciated if you could do this. And I'm hoping that everybody has access to this. If you don't have access to it, or if you're having trouble with the link, please let us know in the chat and we can hopefully help you out. Sharif can hopefully help you out.
Pierre, I'm going to hand the sharing screen to you now so I can manage the people who are having trouble.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the website and share my screen so we can see what people are doing. Oh, good. We have youth funding policy and a sustainable diets policy in South Africa. Thank you for using different colors. This will help us over the long run. Please feel free to provide some guidance for us so that we can maybe come back to you and have a slightly longer discussion. I need to check with Angela
Yes.
how much time we have left in my session, because maybe we want to save 5 minutes towards the end.
For your session, I think we can go ahead another 10 minutes.
Okay, good, thank you. All right, so we'll go for another 5 minutes of putting in some policies, and then we'll have 5 minutes of clarifications from the people who have provided us with their wonderful information.
And please don't forget to add your acronym just before each of the different sticky notes, so that way we know who you are and we can ask you some questions.
Okay, we have somebody who's doing some free writing. That's great.
Creativity is always welcome.
Yes.
We'll ask you to stick to the sticky notes if you can, please. Thank you.
Yes, the sticky note, it's will
easier.
help us identifying better the answers.
Yeah. So far, we haven't had anybody indicate whether there were co-benefits evaluated. So if you have some information on whether some health co-benefits were evaluated, some other financial co-benefits, that would be really helpful, because one of the most important things that we learned through our evaluation of these 25 case studies were that if there was a synergy between an environmental policy and, say, an economic or a social policy, then usually those policies were more successful because they tended to address the root cause of the problem, the environmental problem, rather than trying to clean up the environmental problem after it had happened. So one of the big things I think we have here is that synergies and co-benefits are actually strengthen policies over time. So if you have some information on that, then I think that would be really helpful.
Yes, and this is just a quick exercise that probably in normal conditions would require much more time and discussion. But yeah, it's just to start reflecting on this topic and how to frame the concepts that were mentioned today. So no need to be very detailed. It's just to start the discussion, and then we will comment later.
Yes, thank you very much, Angela. So
no, I see a few answers are already coming in, so it looks looking nice.
Yes, thank you. So, pardon me. Maybe we can start with the youth funding policy. Pardon me. Can I ask, I'm not sure who is working on the youth funding policy. Ernest, is that you, the visiting duck? Or is that? Is that somebody else? Okay. Sharif, do you have?
No, I don't have the information. They are anonymous, but whoever is part of the youth funding policy, you can please speak up, unmute yourself, and tell us more about it.
please, we can start with the youth funding policy. This sounds like a very interesting policy. It's had some cost-benefit analysis and some co-benefits derived from it. So if you wouldn't mind just speaking up and giving us just a description of the youth funding policy, that would be very helpful.
Hello.
Hello.
My memory of the policy, I think, is a bit not complete, but if I remember well, it started when we had a high number of unemployed youth. There was a high number of university graduates who could not find work because the job market was very saturated. And then the government came up with different youth funding programs. There was a policy to say we need to have, youth funding so that young people could actually start their own projects. And the funding was actually positioned with the Department of Youth under the Ministry of, I forgot the name of the ministry, something to do with gender and sports, something like that. So you find that a lot of the young people then would apply for the funding. So now there are certain issues that needed to be established. First of all, if, for example, you give a young person money to start, let's say an internet cafe, is actually the baseline that actually say for you to operate an internet cafe, this is how much money you actually need. If you're going to say, I want to sponsor a young person, maybe to start a beef farm, do you know the cost? For example, the cost of the land, the cost of buying the cattle, the first 6 months of operational money, buying the cost of the feed. Some of those things were not there. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because there was a sum of money that is established to say, okay, the maximum that we can get for youth fund is 50,000. Based on what? And you find that most of the time, the funding, first of all, did not push the projects to the level where it was supposed to be. Some of them people will get the 50,000 and end up just buying the land with no cattle to put in there. Some of them people will end up, let's say they wanted to start a small processing facility, they end up just buying the machinery. And then there's no money to actually buy the raw materials. So that's what I'm saying, issue of the baseline there was actually not there. And then the issue of who should qualify, you'll find that a lot of young people, some of them with no business skills, some of them with no training in the industry that they want to go in. There was no such kind of leveraging, because you'll find that the young people would actually buy what you call these briefcase businesses, whereby they just have a business consultant who gives them a ready-made business plan, and actually doesn't work. So then in the end, when I look at my limited understanding of the cost-benefit analysis, was that then at the end of the day, it became a very expensive policy, in the sense that the government poured so much money into this funding, and yet the outcomes are not there. A lot of the young people did not pull through, especially with their core, what is the word? It's like they're given a certain amount of money and they're expected to return only maybe 50% of the money. A lot of the young people could not even return that money back, so that the money could actually sponsor more young people, because the businesses failed. Now, in terms of issue of monitoring evaluation, they failed because when you look at who is monitoring, if let's say Pierre is actually doing what he's supposed to be doing, the monitoring is very limited. If, for example, Pierre takes the money and he buys a Mercedes-Benz with the money, nobody knew that. There were a lot of all these things coming up all over the place. So I don't know if I should go further.
Oh, thank you, Mina. That's very helpful. You can see the types of challenges that policymakers run up against when they're putting these policies in place. And
but then the issue was that the monitoring and evaluation was not so clear and it was not so strong. That is why a lot of young people ended up squandering the money, and or some of them ended up, not actually having enough. I mean, they came up with a true effective business model, but the fact that it was underfunded because the money is kept at some wild figure which nobody knows who actually came up with that maximum figure, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And financial incentives are really sometimes hard to change or pull back, so that these policies that just give away money sometimes become quite problematic over time. I wondered if, Angela, I have time to ask about the Sustainable Diets program in South Africa.
Maybe we can take one more minute to go through this last point, and then we move to the next presentation.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. So basically, the Sustainable Diets, it's still a very nascent project. So it's about doing research in order to inform policies about sustainable diets. So the focus was, so I will start with the co-benefit quadrant, because it's not really a policy that was devised, and we are not going to be assessing cost benefit. It's mostly doing interdisciplinary research. So the reason why I chose to present this project, to mention this project, it's because I see that much emphasis has been placed on monitoring and evaluation plus learning, which was mentioned as a very important aspect to consider in the future. So maybe co-benefits, what I would like to say, a take-home message would be to start thinking about co-benefits during the co-designing of the project, if there's going to be a co-design aspect where people come together before the project in order to identify leverage points, in order to know what to focus on during co-production for the policies, and whether or not it's going to be an evidence-based policy or some other types of policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Nafisa. That's very helpful. Yes, we have found justifying policies with actual physical data on potential co-benefits or real co-benefits that you have measured throughout the process is actually very helpful. Again, as I said, the synergies with these other areas of policy, either economic synergies or social synergies, really make it, really strengthen the policy and get us to a point where the policy produces quite a lot of benefits and they can be demonstrated as the policy evolves. Okay, Angela, I'm happy to turn this back to you, and thank you everyone for such a great participation in the exercise. Really pleased, and thank you for all your efforts.
Thanks, Pierre. Before we close your session, there was a question regarding the report you shared, if that's available to the public, and you can share the link, that would be great. It was a question from Remy.
Sure, I can do that right away.
Thanks a lot. Thanks also for this interactive session. I would now move to the last presentation for today. It will be done by Dimo, and it will be an intervention on STI policy assessments, challenges, and lessons learned. Dimo, you have the floor.
Thank you. I see. Is my screen showing up well?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to be speaking to you based on some of the experiences that I've had in doing STI policy reviews.
We don't see you though.
Okay, let me see. Is that there? Perfect, that should be better. Okay. So based on my own experience working on STI policy reviews in UNCTAD, As you may know, STI policy reviews is an old program activity in UNCTAD. We've so far done 16 of them since I think the first one was done in 2009. The most recent ones were from Botswana, and Zambia should be going to press any day. The objective of doing the STA policy reviews at the end of the day, so the ultimate objective, is to strengthen the national innovation systems of the countries, and we focus all our efforts to try to do this in a way that addresses a key problem, and this is the problem, and that is that we usually get requests to do STA policy reviews in a situation when there is no monitoring or evaluation process at all. However, there's a new policy being prepared or an old one being revised. So we're kind of asked to do the impossible, and very often we have, when our first meeting is with a group of stakeholders, the stakeholders themselves will ask us, how do you expect to do a policy evaluation when there has been no monitoring, no performance indicator, nothing has been tracked for the last 5, 10 years, and so forth. So I'll outline approximately what we try to do, and it's how would you say, an honest attempt to do something. And the reason why we try to do this instead of just leaving it at that and saying, well, you know, there's nothing in place, so there's nothing else to do, is I think what Ludo mentioned, you know, before, and that is that at some point the policy learning process has to kick off. You know? And this is really the important thing. So, you know, we can't chicken and egg this question, you know, eternally. So we just might as well start from nothing and try to see what we can build. So what we do is we usually do a policy evaluation, meaning the actual paper policy itself and what we can assess about it and how it functions at the very lowest level. Usually it does function at a very low level. We try to assess the national system of innovation in the country. We try to provide some kind of assessment of the innovation performance at a national level, and link these two elements together. We try to help the agency or the group of stakeholders that have asked us to help with this activity, to define some goals and outcomes. And finally, we may suggest how to move forward on this topic. So, policy evaluation. We tend to look at the STI policy that is under review or under consideration. We try to see what is the level of coherence for the national development strategy. This is not as simple as it looks, because very often countries will have a vision type of development strategy, a vision 2030, vision 2040, but they will also have a number of national development plans in some order. Some countries are at the 3rd one, some are at the 10th one, it doesn't really matter. And sometimes between the vision document, which is a very long-term document, and the national development strategy, the national development plan, which is a medium-term document, there's sometimes some incongruence between these two documents, as new topics have arisen, new challenges have arisen, and in the STI domain, new technologies and all kinds of innovations have arisen that were not under consideration during the vision document, the long-term document. We also ask ourselves, do these high-level development strategies, so the vision documents and the national development plans, do they actually recognize STI? We go through them and try to identify where is STI in these actual policies and how is it placed. It's very interesting that you find in many of these documents, depending on the country, you know, it can be in very different places, and very often it actually follows the institutional structure, the organizational structure of the ministries. So there seems to be an approach where STI is placed from a development strategic point of view, not where it needs to be in order to support the development process, but looking at which ministry does what, and does it have an agency that takes care of this question or not, and then it's placed there. So for some countries, STI is a matter of higher education, one of the sub-themes of higher education. For others, it's a sub-theme in export promotion, et cetera, et cetera. So it is not consistent across countries, but also internally it can be in very different places. We also tend to look at the outreach of other policies to other policies and policy domains, meaning that when we look at the actual STI policy and the review, we try to see where it touches industrial policy, education policy, and so forth, and how does it do it? We look at the implementation matrix. This is an interesting part to see where it engages with other stakeholders and government bodies in some form of implementation, even if the actual monitoring and evaluation is not very strong at that point. Then what we do is we look at all other policies that we think are relevant to the STI policy. So we take a backward look and we try to see, is there an implicit or explicit acknowledgement of science, technology, and particularly of innovation in other policies, such as, again, industrial policy, such as health policy, education policy, agricultural policy, and so forth. We really look for the word innovation and to see its presence is indicative of whether the policymakers have a deep understanding of the importance of innovation as the outcome of science technology, in the sense that we can do science technology all we want, but if we don't have innovation outcomes, it's all kind of a spent effort with no real impact on people's lives. And then we try to see, how are all these policies interrelated? I spoke about looking at the implementation matrix for the STI policy that's under review, but we also do look at the implementation matrices of all the other policies that we had just mentioned. The question of who does what is really important and how these crossings are there. Unfortunately, many times these are just on paper and they're all nicely indicated and there's these tables and columns that we look at and so forth. So then we need to go beyond that and we actually need to ask the questions of what is the actual history of collaboration or the history of joint activities, and try to develop from that some sense of the intensity and the quality of the relationships between the various and these government stakeholders. Now, this brings us to another issue here, and this is the questioning of how functional is the national system of innovation or the innovation ecosystem. There have been some discussions. I clearly remember Marco discussing it the other day, and from my point of view, I don't see the national system of innovation as a policy. I see it as a framework for policy design. So do people who design policy, and in particular STI policy, think of the STI policy in terms of supporting or establishing or strengthening a national system of innovation? Is it implicit or explicit? Sometimes they don't use the word national system of innovation, but you see when the actual policies are developed that there is an acknowledgement of stakeholders and the relationships and collaborations and so forth, and the establishment of common goals and working on issues such as directionality and policy coherence. So sometimes it is implied; it's not really, but we tend to look through that. We try to do a mapping of the innovation system and subsystem. Now, this is a fancy word. What we actually do is we draw it. And in drawing it, it reveals a lot of interesting things about how various entities, agencies, and firms, government bodies, research institutes, so forth, how they're all linked up. And one of the things that we always find, and this is a bit of a sad discovery, and that is that research institutes, which is supposed to be one of the core stakeholders, are always on an island somewhere, unlinked to anything. So, and the other thing that we also find is when we look at the subsystem of finance, which is a really important thing to map out the financial system in terms of who is financing what type and what size of entity. And we can see when we map the subsystem that there are obviously very large gaps in the system. There are grants sometimes for science and research, but then when we have firms that are startups, that are early phase development, there's always this huge gaping hole. When there are large firms who have equity, who have real estate, who have very secure contracts in their books, whether related to government procurement or large scale development, for example, in real estate or infrastructure. Banks will cooperate with them, but then there's this whole in-between mode, and when there's nothing. And when you actually map out the system, you find that the institutions who are responsible for some of the functions of a national system of innovation are actually not there. Now, this brings me to a third point, and this is what we also look for, and this is a question of how strong are the information gatekeepers. Now, this is a very important question. If we look at the question of is the national system of innovation operating, we can picture the national system of innovation as a number of intersecting domains, let's say, who are very sometimes formally, sometimes informally network and linked up. So what we look is in the NSI is the networks, the linkages, the interactions, and the relationships that are there. Clearly, firms are in the middle from our point of view, at least, and government is not the central agent in the national system of innovation. And we look at the quantity and the quality of the relationships among all of these policy domains. We also look at the largest or most important stakeholders and what are their capabilities and what are their capacities in terms of resources, financial resources, but also human capacities. Are there just, I mean, for example, I've been to a ministry of STI where there are only maybe 4 or 5 people working there. And they have a very large mandate and strategy and implementation matrix and so forth. And it is unbelievable that any of this can be achieved with or without key performance indicators, monitoring and evaluation built in. So we also look at what learning does the system support, and what are the knowledge flows. Now, this is all nice when you look at it, because you will discover between the vocational schools and the industry, and there will be internships here, and there will be some grants for this and that and so forth. So people will tend to have, even left on its own, and I tend to say that every country has a national system of innovation, except that some are operating at a lower level and some are operating at a higher level. But anywhere you go, you will see these linkages and interactions. It's not that they do not exist, it's that they are not sufficient for what the development aspirations of the country are. So what is stopping this growth in these exchanges, these linkages, these learning knowledge flows? These are these information gatekeepers. Now, we all have them all in our institutions. It sounds like a theoretical thing, but it's a very practical thing, because if I want to have a horizontal collaboration, for example, with UNIDO and UNESCO and so forth in workstream 6, now my question is, do I need clearance for any of this? Do I have to pass this through my section head, through my branch chief, and through the division director? And then does it have to go through the Secretary General's office? And of course, unsurprisingly, for quite many UN type of activities, the clearance processes and who gets to say what and who is allowed to say what, can be very arduous. And it, in fact, it detracts a lot of cooperation and collaboration. The same thing happens in institutional life everywhere else, in every country, developed and developing. Someone recently said that while we have some problems in monitoring and evaluation in developing countries, they are not developing country problems. They are problems, they're global problems. Only in this particular course, in this particular session, we're discussing it for the sake and benefit of developing countries of the SADC region. But everyone cooks with water, and therefore everyone has the same problems. So these information gatekeepers are either processes, guidelines, or even persons of authority in a particular hierarchy who block horizontal communication. And they block it either by rules or by decentralizing it. For example, if I have to go through 3 weeks of checking, is my memo cleared? Can I call? What about the meeting? Will someone show up? I'm not going to even try to make this meeting with another stakeholder where I would like to discuss something and try to see if I can discover and develop some kind of synergies. The most unfortunate thing about it is that when we look at government, we have probably the most information gatekeepers in government agencies. And I have been to to meetings in government agencies where I could not convince one government agency to meet another one unless there have been letters exchanged through the permanent secretaries of these institutes. Now, unfortunately, at the level of an active flowing STI policy in its implementation, and therefore in generating the outcomes that can be monitored and evaluated, these kind of things are huge disincentives. So from my point of view, what I've seen in doing the STI policy reviews, we all need to look inwards to ourselves and our institutions and have a good thought of, what are the information gatekeepers in institutions and which do we really need, because sometimes we really need them because there are political issues at stake. Fine, but at a working level issues on STI policy, perhaps we need to try to reduce these as much as possible. So the other thing that we do look at is reporting directions and information flows. And this is a bit tied to this information gatekeeper issue. So within the STI policy itself, we try to see, how the information reporting flows go through funds and agencies to ministries to cabinet, both top down and bottom up. And then we look at the information flows and how established they are among all stakeholders. And here we're talking about horizontal information flows. I had a very interesting discussion some at one of the STI policy reviews when I asked a national committee on science and technology about how their collaboration is. No, I asked them when was the last time they met the university that was in charge of. They had a big engineering department, and it seemed to me that there were some common ground in one or the other research topics. And they explained to me that they do not have any contact, and the reason why is because it was very difficult to actually establish contact and physically perform this kind of thing. And anyway, no one has been doing it anyway. So there is sometimes a bit of, how would you say, doing things the way they were being done, and habit tends to form, and it stops these horizontal information flows. Once one gets into the habit of sharing information horizontally, and I think our workstream 6, I think I can say this is a really positive example in my professional life, then that becomes the new habit, and we have an acceleration and a takeaway in a very positive direction. Finally, one of the things that we try to do while during the time we are trying to establish what is in this policy and how the national system of innovation works is we try to develop what we call a consensus narrative of what works and what doesn't in the particular country or for that particular policy. And we basically do this by interviewing as many people as we can from as many diverse stakeholders as we can. So we talk to civil society, we talk to private sector, we talk to we even talk to micro enterprises, people who have shops with 5 people that are producing something, trying to adapt a certain technology and so forth. We try to talk to medium-sized enterprises and even large companies. So everyone, and try to develop this consensus narrative. What is the point here? We know that we cannot replace data, but this narrative may uncover some truths and provide some insight. However, we also have to look back when we're looking at monitoring and implementation. The data itself that we monitor and the indicators that we can establish, they do not provide the narrative. I like to say they're just the nuts, not the connections. And what is really important from policy is actually these connections. So there's no point in having the data established in the particular sector or country and then coming back to UNCTAD or UNIDO or UNESCO and then trying to dream up a narrative there looking at the data. The narrative is in the country among the stakeholders. We just need to ask. Of course, what happens is that after about 30 or 40 discussions approximately, the narrative starts crystallizing. So some of the extreme positions, we can brush them away, but we start developing a clearer picture of what is going on. And again, I underline, this really requires a large number of discussions with many diverse stakeholders. So,
Dimo, 1
yes.
minute.
Okay, so after this, we proceed to the assessment of innovation performance. We use a number of available reports that are there that gives a kind of a macro level evaluation of innovation incomes. We also try to evaluate the framework conditions. This is basically, as far as I know, an OECD concept. So we look at the usual economic indicators, macro indicators, cost of capital, what physical infrastructure there is, what human capital is there, R&D labs, and so forth. The problem with this is that linking these things, the framework conditions, in causal relationships to innovation outcomes and to the current STI policy, it has to be taken with a huge grain of salt. There are many caveats there. So we're kind of taking a leap of faith and trying to imply that certain things have caused others, or that if we fix one or the other thing, that this will be an improvement. Often it is true, but really one has to be a little bit guarded about making extensive statements. Finally, goals and outcomes. What do we try to do with these policy reviews? First, we try to build capacity to carry the new or revised STI policy. And we want to convince the people who are undergoing the STI policy review with us that the process of producing the policy review is as important as the review in the sense of the final document, because during the process, they will meet the other stakeholders, they will engage in discussions, they will share the challenges and so forth. So the policy review will serve the upcoming policy revision. I hope it will energize the policy learning cycles, which is really important. Develop a consensus of common challenges. Very important is defining the organizational and structural challenges in the agency. Sometimes the agencies that carry the STI mandate are not equipped to do so, and they need to recognize this in a frank manner and develop their own strategy on how to take this on. Developing priorities, stages, short, medium term is very important. Also developing a locus of coordination for future policy. Because we have a lot of joint meetings with many stakeholders in the same room, these meetings tend to become some kind of a stakeholder a committee or commission for further work. And of course, we have to reflect on development of auxiliary agencies, funding vehicles, and general institution building. So finally, how to move forward, and this is why we're here, all of us at the IATT and Workstream 6. There are many UN and other international organizations that do policy reviews. There are, of course, international consultancy firms and local research institutions that can help. But at the end of the day, decisions are needed among the stakeholder, the main STI agency in the country. And this is that they need to, the goodwill is not enough, So what needs to be addressed is an underlying policy process. Is there a change in the policy? Is there a revision? Is there a new policy coming up? Is there a first policy coming up? Doesn't something need to be critically changed? There needs to be a definition of objectives and goals. We need to establish who are the stakeholders. Very often, the mandated agencies for STI do not know who the stakeholders, the STI stakeholders are. They know of them, but they don't know them. And finally, to develop a commitment, timeline, funding, and human resources. It's very important that there's an external evaluation component with no vested interest in the outcome. In this sense, I'm somewhat negative on international consultancy firms and research institutions, because very often they do their work with a view to have an additional contract following up, and they do tend to say what the client wants to hear. And finally, all of our Workstream 6 agencies here can guide and help. So if you need to do a policy review and need to implement a better monitoring and evaluation system in your next policy or in the revised policy, please do contact all of us. We can work together and help you out. So thank you very much. Apologies for the slightly longer presentation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dimo, for this very concrete presentation, providing some guidelines on how to approach an STI policy evaluation. I would like now to open the floor for discussion. Please feel free to raise your hand and pose your question to any of the speakers we had today, but of course, Dimo in particular, who just did the presentation, or post your comments and questions in the chat box. I see Annalene is ready to ask a question or comment.
No, thank you, Angela, for facilitating the session. And also thank you to all the presenters, to Cornelia, Pierre, Dimo, and yourself. And this goes to all three, the presenters, to Cornelia, Pierre, and Dimo, because I think the presentations are complementary in terms of what they've presented, the concepts of monitoring and evaluation. Where do you then fit in the exercise of foresight in the monitoring and evaluation process. And then obviously Professor Kota also stressed the issue of learning, because countries, I would take countries like South Africa, who have been doing foresight for a number of years. They've created some sort of community of practice within the country, but obviously working very closely with the international agencies such as the OECD. We know that South Africa's first policy review or National System of Innovation Review was done by the OECD, I think as far back as 2005, if I'm not mistaken. And through the OECD review, there was a ministerial review that the South Africa, I'm just using the case of South Africa. And then after the ministerial review, there was then development of a number of policies and strategies. They've undertaken another review now and a foresight exercise, which has led them to revising their white paper on science and technology. They've got a new white paper on science and technology, which they've passed through Parliament. And now they're developing what they call the National Decadal Science Plan. But they also have a number of agencies that are in place in the system of innovation, such as the Center for Science and Technology Innovation Indicators, SESTI, which is tasked on conducting the R&D and innovation surveys. So it's an agency of the Ministry of Science and Technology or the Department of Science and Technology. They've got another agency called the National Advisory Council, which does also assessments and has a direct reporting mandate to the minister. So kind of independent reporting. And then they also have the Academy, the National Academy of Sciences, ASAF, that does also independent reviews and of different policy issues. And all of these agencies have a parliamentary mandate also, because they've been established through Parliament. So it's just looking at all of those, the institutional infrastructures that are involved in that, which other countries don't have the privilege of having all those institutions, but also the carrying out what we call foresight exercises, because we don't see that happening and it's a capacity we would like to develop within the continent, but specifically within the region. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Annelien. Dimo, would you like to comment on this?
If someone else has a comment, I'd rather they start, because my comment is a bit on this topic is not the usual comment.
Okay.
But I have a question for Annelien. You know, does foresight include, or is that a part of the complex of foresight and road mapping? Because when you foresee things, that's one thing, but then if you have foreseen them, you necessarily need to develop a roadmap to address them. So is this one of a bundle of the same issue, Annelien?
Yeah, I think it's a bundle of the same issue because it includes also road mapping. But I think if we have colleagues from South Africa on the line, I thought I saw them. They could also come in and comment. Tina, I see Tina is in from the National Advisory Council. So sorry, Tina, for putting you on the spot. But if colleagues from the South Africa can also comment on this issue, because we see that happening, you know, as part of the process of obviously measuring the system or evaluating the system or the national system of innovation here. And I've also picked up something through the three presenters. There's an interchangeable use. Some of you use National Innovation System. You, for example, Dimo, used National System of Innovation. Cornelia used National Innovation System. What is the difference? Because some of you use NIS, some of you use NSI, sorry. Thank you.
It depends on who did the Swedish translation.
That's also true.
Yeah, the original literature on national systems of innovation was done by a group of economists and political scientists and researchers in northern Scandinavian, Baltic countries, and I assume that they use these terms. I think they also, you have innovation ecosystem. That's the third term. I think we use them all interchangeably. So whoever is, it's up to the editor of the paper, let's say.
Thanks, Dimo and Annelien. Nelly and Pierre, if you would like to complement.
Yeah, for me, I just have a short question. How do they, like, as they work with countries like they work with Botswana now, how do they help countries then to have synergy between some of these policies? For example, we know that in Botswana, our STI is under our ministry.
Okay,
perhaps I can take that immediately. How to enable?
Okay, sorry. Yeah,
it
is under our ministry. It is under our Ministry of Infrastructure.
Right.
Tertiary education. How do you help them link with other independent institutions that deal directly with innovation, so that we don't see duplication of efforts across the country? How do you help countries to do that? Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think here, this is one of the last points that I made, is that the process of developing a policy, an STI policy review, or an STI policy evaluation, it necessarily brings in all these people with which you may want to explore synergies. So when the process of the policy review starts, and it usually lasts between 6 months and 3 years, depending on the country and the situation, during this process, the mandated, so the agency that has the STI mandate will necessarily have to sit at the table and spend quite a few hours with all the other stakeholders. And developing synergies is not a how to say, a systemic, formal thing. You don't write a paper and then the synergies appear. It is a human activity. It is an activity of exploration. It is an activity of sharing knowledge, learning, discussing, and exploring what are your challenges and what are the commonalities of the other people working in the same field. So unless you have a high level of human interaction, you will never be able to enable synergies by sitting in an office. So this is a crucially important thing. One interesting story that I came across in one country was there was a director of an industrial estate, and they were asked what was the best investment they made. And they said, my best investment for industrial estate was making a volleyball court. I spent $10,000 to make a volleyball court. That brought all the 20 businesses who were in the estate playing volleyball. They all made teams, they played volleyball, and out of that, 3 new companies came out, which they employ each more than 3,000 people. So we need to get away from this idea that the policy work is always kind of a formal, political type of governance, interaction where everyone is very stiff and reads, keynotes off a piece of paper. No, it is really about, it's a human process, and it's a process of getting to know your peers. And this is why I insist on this horizontal interaction. Horizontal information flows are extremely important. If you can enable those, then the synergies will start appearing in and of by itself. Innovation is a bit of a random thing. It happens. We don't know how. It's a very uncertain thing. We cannot make it happen. We can only provide the environment that increases the chances for innovation to happen, and also for the synergies to develop that enable it.
Thanks, Dimo. If you don't mind, we are about to get close to the time when this session was supposed to finish, but we still have quite a few questions, both in the chat, and I see a few hands raised. So if you don't mind, I will continue for another few minutes, the discussion. I'll go forward with the question from Harry. I see your hand raised.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
My question is perhaps to Dimo. Maybe it's rather philosophical. You may opt me to answer it. Did you have a sense, perhaps a universal sense, when you are reviewing the STI policy in Zambia, that there was actually a need for that policy, or there was appreciation of the existence of such a policy?
Yes, there's a new STI policy in Zambia now. There's the 2020 policy, and there's a new Ministry of Technology and Science. So we are at the ready to support them in that implementation and provide some capacity building to assist that. But regarding the old policy, there have been a lot of problems with that, and I think one of the problems with that is that it was hidden. The 1996 STI policy of Zambia was hidden as a department in a ministry that didn't have STI in its name only, but for a brief period. So it was in various places and it was never at the forefront. And being that case, no one actually knew about it. So I think we had already some discussion by Ludo on Wednesday that really when you implement a policy, and this was one of the problems in Zambia, the tool set is very different. You need to communicate, you need to publicly relate what the aspirations are, you need to engage the stakeholders and so forth. So the implementation is a very different activity than the design. So that policy is well designed. It has all the components, it recognizes all the stakeholders, it even has a section on monitoring and evaluation. But when it came to the implementation, it was not done so well, and one of the reasons is because it was not communicated well, because it was never the key mandate of any of the ministries in which it was placed. Is that okay?
That's fine. I asked because I was looking at the discussion maybe from yesterday, and it was centered on implementation and who does what and the intersectorial involvement. But I was looking at it from accountability. I mean, I saw in the Multimeter today who is responsible. Most of us voted a particular ministry responsible for.
Yeah, well, I mean, accountability is a huge issue, of course, but the problem is there, and I've seen this in many countries. Here's how it goes. There's a particular subtopic in the STI policy that needs the involvement of other stakeholders. So that ministry, calls the other stakeholders to come to a meeting where they table that part of the policy and say, look, guys, we need your assistance and help on this, and we need to share some of the policy actions with you on points, 4 through 7, for example. The problem is that the people who show up at this meeting are very often low-level policymakers, junior policymakers, who do not actually have any decision-making power, and who have been sent there. I get the impression, because I've sat in a few of these meetings, I get the impression that they've been sent there because they had nothing better to do that day. So it wasn't as if the permanent secretary of the other ministry showed up or one of the directors of departments. It was someone who was expendable on that day. So these people, they show up, they don't want to cause any problems for anyone. And they look at what is tabled to them, they say, yeah, and fine. And that's how the meeting ends, and there's no follow-up to that. So this is your real life, operational experience of how this thing that we call in big titles and big names and so forth, collaboration and finding synergies. This is how it actually ends up. It ends up by the other stakeholders peacefully, kindly, with a lot of consideration, rubber stamping the original proposal with not much critical reflection. They don't say, oh, sorry, but the way you've placed this, we can't really wrap our heads around this. Maybe if we do it this way, we could work on it together. They look at it and they say, okay, fine, yeah, I don't want to make any problems with you. I don't want the minister giving you a problem or the permanent secretary. So it's fine with us. And this is how these meetings end. And this is the reason why this happens.
Thanks, Dimo. Cornelia and Pierre, feel free to jump in, or I can move to the next question from Matodi from Botswana.
Yes, just a quick comment and to add on what Dimo has just said about the involvement from the different, for instance, science-based ministries. I think it's really important, and indeed it has to be at a kind of high level. At least the decision should be taken and encouraged really to through official coordination mechanisms, through establishment of some interministerial committees. in order to engage really this broad range of stakeholders and not just have one ministry in silo conducting the design, but also the implementation of the policy. Thank you.
Yeah,
Angela, everything's been said on this. Thank you.
all right, thanks. Matodi, you had your hand raised. Do you still want to ask a question or comment? Matodi, yes.
Thank you very much. I hope you can. Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I think my question goes to Dimo. I basically seek your understanding or your advice on the issue of ex ante impact assessments or evaluations, because
I think the audio
I
is
cannot
breaking.
translate.
In most cases, countries developed very good.
Matodi, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the audio is breaking and we cannot hear your question.
Can you write your question, Matodi, please, in the chat?
Write your question in the chat. I will move to a couple of questions that are already in the chat from Remy, for example. He's asking, should STI policy review be undertaken only for the purpose of revising existing policy, or policy review may equally be necessary to identify gaps in policy space and to propose horizontal policy instruments? I think this is addressed specifically to Dimo.
Well, I think, you know, the Anneline's question on foresight and road mapping is critical here, because a good policy review necessarily would engage a foresight road mapping exercise. But here we have to, and this is where the gaps can be identified. But the problem is, what are we looking for? You know, and are we looking for technology gaps, or are we looking for policy gaps? In the same sense, you know, when we're doing foresight road mapping, are we doing technology foresight road mapping, or are we doing policy foresight road mapping? And there are problems because these two, they get mixed up and some clarity tends to get lost along the way. And we need to be a bit more clear on what we're actually talking about. This is why I was hesitating to actually give an answer to the first question. You know. But principally, of course, a policy review will identify gaps. And if the government or the mandated agency wants to revise the STI policy following a policy review, it should do so. If it doesn't want to do it, it's really their prerogative. You know. The policy review helps also in developing some lower level tools, meaning actions, policy actions, and policy tools that do not entail the revision of the top level STI policy. And there needs to be also some understanding of flexibility here. I think what is really important is when you have an STI policy, a national STI policy, that there should be some flexibility and policy space included, so that perhaps revisions along the way can be added as an addendum to the policy and not have to have the policy go through Parliament all over again, because this may then take years, which in fact has been the case in Zambia. The actual policy has been in Parliament for consideration for something like 10 years.
Thanks a lot, Dimo. I would take the last two questions and comments. One from Nafisa. Keywords mentioned are leap of faith and learning. How can this be actualized, especially where diversity of stakeholders? Nafisa, if you'd like to expand the question. And then we have another question from Kalisa Felli from Rwanda. I see you raise your hand. Do we need focal person in each key actor to support in policy review? Would you like to complement, Kalisa?
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for the good presentations. And my question is really related to, based on experience. I was just trying to ask this question to see if it's a good idea, having like focal person in each key sector, so that in order to have proper coordination in the policy review, we make sure that we are talking to the right people, because, you know, when you don't have like a focal person and you're trying to do the policy review, you find like people attending the review might change. Today you are having a staff in charge of monitoring and evaluation. Tomorrow, maybe the sector or the institution is sending somebody else. And we find like you are not really having a proper coordination in the policy review. Thank you.
Angela, I just wanted to maybe respond to that one.
Please, go ahead.
It's very helpful to have a focal point, for sure. The challenge is that it's sometimes difficult to understand the network of other individuals behind or who are supporting the focal point. And it's very important to make sure that the focal point is expressing the views of the group rather than just their own personal views. Or, you know, providing their expertise, either supported by the expertise of others in the review. So I think it's a good coordination mechanism, but they also need to have a group or a network behind them.
Yeah, can I just add something there? You know, I think there's a problem with the perception of what is the level of importance of STI policy generally. If you look at countries who have managed to get out of low-income development stages and maybe even become middle-income countries or even developed countries, even though they don't like to label themselves that way. And of course, the Asian experience and a couple of other countries, you know, are indicative of this. What we see in just about all of them is that they had very strong STI policies that were top-tier policies. Okay? Sometimes they were masked as industrial policies, but in fact they were STI. They were technology innovation policies. What this meant was that the focal point was never someone appointed in the agency. It was the permanent secretary or the minister. If we can't have permanent secretaries, or at the very worst, department director in charge of technology innovation or innovation promotion or something like that. So let's say at least second tier, second echelon level in the ministry, so deputy minister level or assistant minister level, there is no chance that any of this is going to work. And this is the reason why this is the case, that some fourth tier policymaker or junior policymaker often gets assigned to be the focal point for STI policy. It is in a way sidelining the whole program. I mean, I think, you know, policymakers and leadership of countries need to realize that this is the tool that has been used by so many countries in the Far East and Turkey, Mexico. There's lots, Costa Rica, lots of examples there where there has been strong STI policy and very strong support from the highest level for developing this national system of innovation. Those countries have managed to develop. Where this has been the problem of a fourth or fifth tier level junior policymaker in the agency, is not happening. So really one has to work on raising the level of importance of this particular policy domain to actually the highest level.
Thanks, Dimo. Nafisa, I see you raise your hand, but please very quickly so that we can move towards the conclusions.
Yes, thank you. So basically, what mechanism do we need in order to be able to link learning and action? So by leap of faith, I understand action. So what would be the best mechanism for that? Thank you.
Who would like to take this one? Dimo, Cornelia, Pierre.
Okay, well,
Dimo, I see.
as I kind of suggested, yes. Like I said, I think many of these things happen at the human level. Everything all the experiences I've researched, I've looked at, I've seen personally, are that when people interact at a people level, outside of mechanisms and so on, because the problem is when you start developing mechanisms, you start creating these structures, and then these structures have very defined guidelines on information flows, and you start creating these information gatekeepers. Instead of actually getting something done, they actually block getting anything done. I'll give you an example. There was one country where there were obviously problems, and it was not Zambia. There were obviously problems with communicating the innovation strategy, the national innovation strategy, to the broader public, and also to the other national stakeholders. So first to national stakeholders, other agencies, ministries, and so forth, and then to the broader public. So one of the work groups that was established within this group of stakeholders, coordinated by the main STI agency, was on how to communicate, how to better communicate the innovation strategy and the innovation mandate and the need and so forth, and to raise it to this highest level. And what they came up with was a proposal for a communications law. And I was fairly shocked by it, because when I read it, I thought, well, anyone who tries to communicate, will refer themselves to the law. And if they have any doubts that they're not following the law and its prescriptions down to the letter, they're not going to communicate. So instead of helping the communication by instilling a formal mechanism and guidelines and protocol through a law, nonetheless, in this kind of country, it would kill all the actual communication rather than enhance it. So we have to be very wary of developing these very rigid structures and then formal linkages. I think what we need to do is we need to work on developing informal, professional relationships with counterparts in other agents, and someone has to start. Someone has to make that invitation to, look, we're having a workshop on this and this with the workstream 6. Why don't you guys from your ministry join us? Here's the registration link, and then maybe afterwards we can have a meeting and a follow-up and see what these workstream 6 people told us. So this is the kind of thing that needs to be done. And there's small steps in the beginning, but eventually they precipitate into larger activities. And as someone asked before, the synergies will start surfacing themselves. If there's potential and if they are there, they will precipitate. If there's no potential, you can't force them into being, because they will not be sustainable in many ways.
Très bien, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dimo, and thanks, Nafisa, for the question. I would now move to the conclusions. I'm sorry if we are a bit late, but I believe it was very important to have this discussion and get your questions. So if my colleagues can support with the last Mentimeter questions, we can. Thanks, Zamay, and thanks, Despina, for sharing the questions. So the two last questions. One is about, we ask you to use 2 keywords to describe the takeaway messages from this specific session. It's been a very rich discussion, so probably it's difficult to synthesize in few words. But there were indeed many topics that were touched. We heard from the beginning the importance of having both monitoring and evaluation jointly taken into account, for example. And also the importance of assessing policy effectiveness within the policy design since the early stages of the policy design. Please feel free to fill in with your keywords. The link is in the chat. There is probably some problem to show the answers. So May, can you please confirm that everything is working properly? Yes, I am starting to see some answers. Synergies, human activity system. Okay, highly appreciated. I hope it's about the session and also the, the importance of monitoring and evaluation. The need for more capacities in monitoring and evaluation. This is also another important aspect that was touched upon today. The strengthening of skills to be able to establish a sound monitoring system and being able also to read what data and analytics and the analysis interviews show us, be able to evaluate what we get from the analysis. Monitoring and evaluation strengthening. Importance of different actors in the process of evaluation. Learning, indeed, this was a point raised by Ludo. It's very well connected to what was discussed today and also to the importance of strengthening capacities. Again, strengthening capacities. Monitoring better for agencies to do not only STI ministries. They can ask without fear, they can ask why some things were not done and advise on what should be done with timeframes. That will be ideal. Indeed, there is also a cultural point on following an evaluation process, which needs to be improved and strengthened throughout the policy making cycle. And indeed, an innovative approach. I assume this means innovative approach to monitoring and evaluation methodologies. Thanks a lot. Probably there are no other answers coming in. And we can move to the next Mentimeter question. This one will not be showed on the screen, but it's very important for us to understand what will be, in your opinion, an additional training or session that you would like to have on these topics related to STI policy and policy instruments. You find the question in the chat. This is very important for us to plan for the future and to understand what are the needs and the requests coming from the participants to our training module. So please feel free to answer in the chat. We will leave it open for a while. And since we are a bit late, I would like now to move towards the end of this session. I'm personally very grateful for this opportunity. It's been very interesting, and the discussion was very rich. Before the last words from the IATT coordinators and from Annelien, the SADC coordinator, I would like to ask you to open the cameras and take the usual family picture. Please start your camera, put your camera on. And I think my colleague Zamei will take the picture in a few seconds. Zamei, let me know if it's done.
Yep, it's done.
Excellent, thanks a lot. So I'd like to invite Annalena to say a few words, and perhaps also Nelly or Dimo as a coordinator of the ITT work stream on capacity building to conclude the session. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you for facilitating the last session today. Very much appreciated. And we thank you to all the presenters who presented on the last 5. We started on Monday. And I'm happy to say that on Monday, we started with numbers at about 65 participants, and we maintained that throughout the week, which was very good. We had the same number of participants throughout up until today, which was the last session. And it's the same participants that have been attending since Monday. So I think that's commendable. We thank our partners, the Interagency Task Force, for collaborating with us, ourselves and the UNESCO Regional Office for Africa based in Harare, Zimbabwe. As you said, we are implementing this as part of the SADC UNESCO STI policy framework. We kickstarted this training in September with module 1, which has led us now to module 7, which is in the form of the IATT. We still have one more module left, which is module 8, which we are also collaborating with Sussex University, TIPSI, the Transformative Innovation Policy Consortium. So we are planning to have that in January of next year. So it's been a very exciting journey, challenging journey, but very fulfilling journey since we started in September. All of this would not have been possible without the convening partner, which is the University of Tshwane in South Africa, the Tshwane University of Technology, and the course coordinator, Professor Mario Siri. I'm not sure if he's here with us, but Professor Mario Siri has been the course coordinator for the training. We thank UNESCO for the financial support that we've received, but also the financial support that SADC itself has invested into this program since its inception. We plan to have a series of another pilot next year. So we will reach out to IATT next year because we also still need to have a session with the parliamentarians. We had in 2 years, we had a session for parliamentarians in 2018, and then we had another session for parliamentarians in 2019, and they've asked for more training, the SADC parliamentarians, and these are parliamentarians responsible for the portfolio committees for science, technology, and education. So next year, we need to have a 1-week session with the parliamentarians. So we will reach out to you to also join forces so that we then deliver the training for the parliamentarians in SADC. I'd like to also thank the member states. Without the member states, this would have not been possible. All the participants from the member states who have been so consistent, we have been committed to this training since we started in September. We had about, out of the 16 member states of SADC, we had 14 member states who signed up with the participation of about 38 participants representing the 14 countries who have signed up out of the 16 countries who are members of SADC. So it's been quite an interesting journey since we started. And thanks also to the coordinators, Cornelia, Dimo, Professor Alkoto, who's been in the forefront, and then also Zhang who has been providing technical support. McNally from the regional office has been tremendous in his response He needs support. I'm not sure how much we can thank McNally. Muche, Sandy, all who have provided support. The interpreters who have supported us through this week. So thank you, Dimo. Thank you, Cornelia. Thank you, Angela. That's the few words from our side. But we also would like to say that can we get a link with all the presentations and all the reports that were generated from the Multimeter? Because I think it will be very important for our own follow-up and reflection on the outcomes of this workshop. Thank you. Over to you, Angela.
Thanks, Annalyn. Indeed, the presentations and the reports from the Multimeter will be shared with you. And I now turn the floor, I don't know, Cornelia or Dimo, just a few words just to close.
Shall I go ahead, Dimo? Yes. It's really to thank all of you, the participants who were with us for the entire week. It was a very intense discussions, sessions, and so really thank you for your attention, for your comments and views and questions. Very interesting. It's not really a training. It's more of an exchange. It's a learning experience from all of us. So thank you for these valuable contributions. I would like to thank and also acknowledge all the IATT colleagues who are with us today, but also those who hadn't participated in these 5 sessions, but who are also part of our group and who are jointly with us designing the various sessions. So just to acknowledge that we are at least 7, 8 agencies on board, and we will be very much looking forward to continue this networking and other opportunities also for the exchange. And lastly, to thank the SADC Secretariat, especially you, Annalyn, for this really great collaboration and opportunities. And also, of course, all the colleagues who are with us and who made this event being possible. Thank you very much. And thank you for the interpreters, and we apologize that we are late on time, but thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot. And I also apologize for being a bit late, but I think it was worth the discussion. So thanks a lot for being with us so late, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for a very successful week. Thank you. Bye-bye.